Hello, my friends. Today we're going to be talking about one of the juiciest topics in chess, which is how to evaluate a position. And for today's example, I chose a pretty imbalanced position where actually I had a hard time figuring out what was going on. So we're going to try to get through it together. It's a game of Vasily Smyslov's, and he's playing with the black pieces. He played a Caro-Kann, and he just went with the move c5. So yeah, makes sense. He's fighting against white's space advantage in the center, and white captured. And here he had a big choice. He took with the bishop, and white avoided the queen trade by playing queen c2. So obviously that's vastly different from the other option that was available to him here, which was queen takes d1. So this was my first question is, well, what is this position like if he trades the queens? White is probably going to capture back with the f-rook, and bishop takes c5. So we have an endgame to evaluate. We have an imbalance in the minor pieces. White has the bishop pair, black has the bishop and knight. We also have a pretty big imbalance in the pawn structure with pawn majorities on different sides of the board. We also have doubled pawns as a factor in the position. So what to make of this? Yeah, well, actually, I looked at this for a while, and I was just like, I don't see the problems for black. In general, this is a pretty good bishop. In general, black wants to have the king somewhere on e7, wants to connect the rooks, let's say trade rooks on the d file. Well, there's also like a knight maneuver like this that can be possible. So the only thing that really worried me here as a potential plan for white, it's actually pretty instructive. If you guys want to stop and think, like, what is the only plan that white has in this position that could be troubling to black? And it arises out of the different pawn structure. And we're going to use the principle of initiate play on the part of the board where you're stronger. In this case, it's the queen side, so the move a3 is really quite logical. And we would like to play b4 and start using that pawn majority, and if we can kick away the bishop, yes, then white's going to have an initiative. But I thought, okay, well, black is just going to go a5. And actually, I don't really see a way for white to get past this move. So I thought about rook a b1. Let's say you insist on playing b4. But black just goes a4. And I did not think that, this position was problematic for black. It just looks like black should be able to keep his pieces on the squares they're on. I mean, rook a3 might not even be like the best move for black, but basically black is okay here. However, what I overlooked completely was the fact that white actually can push through the move b4 in this position. Yeah, so really it's going to come down to pure calculation here, because b4 is obviously a desirable move, but it looks like it just gives away a pawn. So when I was looking at this position, I didn't really think there was a problem because the knight is covering the a8 squares, the rook can't go there. If you attack here, the bishop can just go back. So what is the problem with this position? Well, the problem is bishop e3. So you actually find a loose piece, and because of the slight disharmony in black's position, which is that, they're not castled and the rook's in the corner, there's a problem with the a8 square. And when black goes knight c8, we go rook b1, and we pick up the pawn on b7 with a winning position. Actually, it's still a good question, is like why that position is so winning, because we're not even up a pawn there. But I guess it is the passivity of black's pieces that is going to be a problem, and I guess the c-pawn is just going to be very strong. Yeah. So the rook and the two bishops are going to be quite powerful there. Although, I mean, yeah, of course, this is not actually like obvious at all, this line, guys. I would say, so even getting a proper evaluation of this endgame is actually pretty tricky, right? So I would say that I, got it more wrong maybe than right? Like in general, I think black is okay here, right? So if white is not going for concrete actions, like black is fine. So for example, like let's say white plays the move king f1, just getting the king off the g file. In this case, if black goes with something like a5, as you see, this is actually a very important prophylactic move that black is relying on a lot to just take away those b4 ideas. Black should be fine. Yeah, so basically overall black is fine, but if white is going to initiate this a3 plan immediately and has the ability to sort of calculate out b4 and evaluate that properly, I guess we can say that white should be having some advantage in this endgame. Now, a5 is not really a forced move from black, but it is actually the most obvious one, I think, to examine first. If you decide that it doesn't work, you might look at moves like knight a4, which was, one of the computer's suggestions, with the point, that if white continues with b4, there's going to be a powerful fork over here. So knight a4 is not a bad option for black, and black might still equalize this game. Like, I would say it's complicated, but basically if you don't get into move a5, like white does have a sort of playing initiative. So white would go rook d2 here, and one potential line that I was looking at with the computer was rook d8, trade, and b3, like that. With the point that on like knight c3, this knight is getting rather trapped. And obviously if you make the knight go back, well, then you get what you wanted, which is that your pawn majority is going to move and you have the bishop pair, so you're going to be better. So basically, how we evaluate this position ultimately, we can say white is better after the move a3. White definitely has like a playing initiative, and black has some problems to solve in the position. And the problems are stemming from the fact that white is able to threaten this plan with a pawn expansion on the queen side, and that the potential of his bishop pair exists in this position, right? There's a potential to show that the bishops are better than the bishop and the knight. So that's the evaluation of this endgame, guys. Now let's take a look and try to evaluate what actually happened in the game, which was bishop takes c5, and white said, let's just go queen c2 and play the middle game. So how do we evaluate this position? Ultimately, it wasn't really that obvious either, actually, guys. It's pretty interesting, right, to evaluate a position where we have an open king, we have double pawns in front of the king, we also have a king in the center, like some lack of development for black, the rooks are not connected. What to make of this whole position? Well, ultimately, I went to the important factor of king safety to evaluate this one. And whose king is safer? You might be surprised at this one, guys, but I decided it's the white king that is on the open file that is actually the safer king, because he can actually go to h1 and be quite hard to touch over there. Well, I think black actually has more problems with their king in the center. It's, when you castle and there's constantly these bishop h6 moves, that looks quite dangerous. Castling queenside also doesn't look very easy. So actually, I thought that because of white's relatively safer king, that white should be having some kind of an advantage in this position. Another thing that I thought about was that in general, black would like to get these bishops off the board, even though he has a good bishop on c5. But part of white's advantage is the bishop pair, like it always is. It's a pretty decent bishop too. And, if you trade off these bishops, you leave white with this bishop, which doesn't look very impressive. And then you can maybe take better advantage of the weaker dark squares in white's position. So black would like to trade off those bishops, but obviously it's actually not easy to do, right? Like if you go bishop d6, you're going to walk into a pin. So, I think the evaluation is that there is some advantage to white. So we are going to this big factor of king safety to make that evaluation. Another thing is that, well, what should black do here? And actually, it's kind of surprising what the best move is in a way. It's a little surprising. It's going to get a lot easier to understand once I explain it. Smyslov played the move f5. And if you look at it, it seems like a very sensible move, right? You're putting pawns on the opposite color of the bishop that you have. Seems logical. You're kind of opening up the queen on this diagonal. Seems also logical. And basically, I mean, this bishop doesn't seem like it's going to be very powerful with the way the pawn structure is going. So I would say Smyslov's move makes a lot of sense, but it also has a big flaw. And the big flaw comes from one of White's main ideas in this position is actually this move b4, right? Again, the concept of using the pawn majority and playing where you're stronger. And that is why the computer suggests the move a5 in this position to start with, just to completely eliminate the b4 idea. And actually, like let's say White goes a3, they keep going with a4, and something like this knight transfer, because the knight was not that good on b6 anyway. So knight d7, and actually we would like to eventually, let's say, get the knight into the center. So that's the plan. And I think, of course, the game, well, in a practical sense, I think the game after a5 will be pretty unclear, actually. I mean, we can say that White has some advantages, but a5 is a powerful move that is going to provide black with counterplay in this game. But Smyslov played f5, and actually White had this strong move b4, which they did not play right away. And let's see what this move is based on. Well, it's based on the concept of opening the position for the bishop pair, for taking advantage of the king that's still in the center. So we're fighting for tempo. Makes sense in a dynamic position where king safety is such a big factor. So let's take a look. What is the point of b4? Well, the first point is that if they take the pawn, it's not actually the double attack that is the issue, because black has a check with the rook and then he can move the bishop. What we're really going for is just c5. And the opening of this diagonal is very dangerous to black. Because even though the knight gets in here, we give a check, there's no good block. Then the bishop comes here. The black bishop is kind of shut out of the game. We only sacrificed a pawn to get those amazing diagonals for our bishop. And I mean, well, this poor king, I mean, look what we're doing to him, right? As soon as he arrives on the g file, we can just slide our king over and bring our rook in, and that will be the end for black. So that's pretty powerful idea, b4. Let's see what else they can do. They can play bishop d4, but that suits us. We like to put our rooks on open files. And basically same concept, c5. So very quickly we're marching forward with those pawns and exploiting the black king position and exploiting that square for our bishop. So that would have been a very nice find for White. Just, it's very much a move based on seizing the initiative, seizing the tempo, and just acting quickly to take advantage of the relative lack of harmony in black's position, right? I mean, black has a king in the center with disconnected rooks, with a knight that is far from ideal. So those are issues of harmony, and it makes sense that White would have a way to exploit them. By the way, White played king h1. We'll go just a few more moves into this game because it's pretty interesting, which is very understandable, right? Just if you don't see b4, I mean, why not take the king off the open file? And here Smyslov actually had another chance to play a move that was better than what he did. And that move is queen to d4. Let's just try to appreciate the power of this move. So he's attacking the bishop, And if the bishop moves to g3, well, then f4 happens and he starts to run into some problems with these pieces. And one of the things that black can do here, it's by no means forced, but it's like a big idea in the position, is to go bishop e7. So remember how I said at the very beginning that black would not mind trading off these dark squared bishops and leaving white with this poor one? Well, this is actually an illustration of how that can work out over the board in a potential line. So in this kind of position, if you achieve this trade, the king on e7 is actually standing pretty safely. And we have nice control over the dark squares. You can see where black has a lot of pieces on dark squares. You can use these kinds of squares for your queen. And yeah, we're not too worried about this attack anymore because the knight just has a nice square to go to. So black is doing fine. So if the bishop goes to e3, then we just step back. And again, we're offering the trade of dark squared bishops, which is pretty difficult for white to avoid. I mean, they can go f4 and we just go queen c7. And how do you avoid this trade without worsening your position? So queen d4 is basically you're playing against this bishop and you're trying to achieve the trade of the dark squared bishops. I know the computer, one of the moves he was looking at was this very strange one, which, I mean, we're not even going to go there because, I mean, it's so far out in terms of like what you need to find, to be better as a white. Like, I'm not even sure if it's better for white, but the move is definitely strange. It's not going to be the first one that is going to spring to white's mind by any means. So, I mean, I guess the point of it is like you're trying to avoid the trade of the dark squared bishops. Like, it's not that easy to achieve, but as a move, it's pretty weird. Yeah, the bishop doesn't seem like very stable on that square so far into black's position. So in the game, though, Smyslov kind of continues going on the wrong track. He goes with the queen to h4. And in this position, well, white actually does find the b4 idea, and just in time, right? Because they definitely need to do something quickly given that their bishop is about to be trapped. So they go b4. And the point is that after bishop takes b4, there is c5 again, knight d5, and a line like this where we again drive that king over to the g file where we can attack him. And obviously, this is not a safe king on h6. So there's going to be multiple ways that we can win this game. Like, we've only invested one pawn to reach this position. We can go bishop c4, and that's going to be very destabilizing for the black pieces. So b4 was definitely a good try. Black played bishop d4, and now white would have been better with a simple move rook a d1. With the point that on f4, there is queen e4 double attack. It's actually quite important, isn't it? Because our bishop is trapped otherwise, so we need some tactical means to like get him out of here. If they take our bishop, we got some advantage in this position because the black knight is not very good. White's pieces have a lot of centralization. And I suppose that if the bishop moves to e5, well, we would think that the move bishop h4 would be quite effective here, right? We just do some sort of deflection on the black queen. And again, with this beautiful centralization that white has and these poorly coordinated pieces, we can see that white should be better here. Instead of moving the rook, though, white decides to initiate like complications with this move, and actually black could have been doing well here with the move f4, which he did not play, but was actually a good chance for him to play against this bishop. And if I take the knight, you take my bishop, and the problem is the rook is hanging, and so are the pawns. Anyway, let's go back a little bit and sum up what we learned about how to evaluate a position. So I feel like for this one, with the queens on the board, I had kind of a better grasp of it. And the key factor in evaluating it was understanding what is happening with the kings, right? So king safety is such a primary thing to look at, right? I mean, there's so many elements that we use to evaluate a position. And actually, let's talk a little bit about that because, in order to intimidate and confuse you, I listed like 8 different factors just to start with before evaluating a position. I'm pretty sure it's not an exhaustive list. It's just what was kind of at the top of my mind that I figured, these are very important things that I'm going to look for. So yeah, you might feel like, wow, that's a lot. Like just in order to understand what's going on the chessboard, I have to go through so many things, right? Yeah, it's true. A lot of things are factored in when you're trying to understand a chess position. But I think on the other hand, every position is going to have a few factors that are going to be the priorities, right? So it's not like, for example, let's say in this position, right? So we say king safety is important. That kind of stems out of the pawn structure. So we do have to notice pawn structure here. Piece quality and development, right? Also, we're going into our understanding of the position, right? Just kind of noticing that, like, let's say white's rooks, they're connected and black's rooks are not. Black has a pretty poor knight on b6, right? These were all things that we also kind of took into account. Open files. Well, there is an open file on the board, and certainly in some cases, white is going to be in a better position to use it than black. Weak squares. This position was not so much, I think, about weak squares. There's not like one particular square that somebody is attacking or going after. Strong squares, outposts. Also not a super big theme of this position. I mean, you can say that the knight would really like to get here, but again, it's a timing thing, so it might just never happen. But there's basically not like a clear square. I mean, you can say like black might want to use that square. You want to pay attention to that square in the center. But still, yeah, weak and strong squares are, let's say, not the biggest things going on in this position. Imbalances. Well, there is an imbalance of bishop pair versus bishop and knight, which is actually pretty significant. And we did see in some lines how, for example, like this move b4 is working, and it's really working because we're trying to work with our bishop pair advantage. We're trying to open up the game and give those bishops some powerful diagonals. So yeah, actually we put quite a lot of those factors into our evaluation of the position, but the very main one was certainly the king safety factor. When you have a king that's open, when you have a king that's in the center, right, you have to, first of all, figure out what is going on with that issue, right? So I think that it's overall just easier for white to solve the issues of their king than for black. And that at least made it kind of possible to understand what's going on in this position. So yeah, guys, I hope that this was useful. Definitely an interesting position to go over with a lot of imbalances, and we will do more of this kind of evaluation exercises in the future.